Hello, I'm Joel Hargis. Welcome to Sun and Fun 2025. We're here on the Florida Aviation Network, and it's the 51st year of Sun and Fun. And boy, we got a dandy this year. It is beautiful. It's been beautiful all week. We got the Blue Angels here, a lot of other great performers, a lot of great vendors. If you're not on your way here, we've only got, well, today and tomorrow. So I encourage you to get over here because it's a great show. I have Robert, and Robert, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Joel. Robert Rockmaker, President, CEO of the Flight School Association of North America.
Flight School Association of North America. So this is a little different than a lot of the people that we talk to and interview. And a lot of times it's about instructors or that kind of thing, but this group is actually for local flight schools, not necessarily colleges, right?
Right.
So give me an example of two or three, like flight safety, or who is in your organization that we might know?
From Carolina Flight Training up in South Carolina, Charleston area, to Aero Guard down there in Phoenix, Arizona, U.S. Aviation, two of the larger schools, Ocean Aviation in Maryland, the state of Maryland. Our association welcomes flight schools, whether they have one aircraft, 25, 50, 100 aircraft. We represent and help on the business side of flight training,
Okay, and how many members do you have?
About 750 members and growing.
750 members, and are they just in the U.S.?
A majority are in the U.S. We do have a few and that are international, and we seem to be getting more international as time goes on.
Well, there must be a good benefit for them for it to be growing like that and even growing internationally.
Every industry, has its trade association.
Right.
And I started this 16 years ago. There was no association on the business side for flight schools. There was nobody that was dedicated and committed to the flight training industry anywhere in the world, for that matter.
And so were you in that business? What was your impetus to do that?
So my background, and I don't really like to talk about myself a whole lot, okay?
We got to start somewhere.
Yeah, we do. I'm an accredited airport executive, AAE. So the first part of my life, after graduating Florida Tech in Melbourne, and I just came from there yesterday from a board meeting, was to get into airport management. I knew at an early age that I did not want to fly for a career. I do have all my certificates and ratings except ATP, so about 1,400 hours of flight time. And but I knew I didn't want to fly for a career. Subsequently, I spent almost 25 years as the executive director for a state aviation association up in Pennsylvania. Just like Florida has the Florida Airport Association, yep, or Florida Aviation Business Association, I was doing the aviation work in the state of Pennsylvania. And the true history was we started a flight training committee in 1997 for the flight schools in Pennsylvania to try to help them. FSANA was not around, was never even a thought in my mind. And that committee started to have a one-day conference seminar.
Okay.
That's how it started. Subsequently, it grew. We invited the flight schools from New Jersey, Delaware, New York State, and eventually in 2001, we brought the conference to Orlando around April, the middle of April somewhere of 2001. Well, I'm sure you and all the viewers will remember we had that terrible terrorist attack in September of 2001, which forever changed America, changed our culture, changed so much.
Did.
It also changed flight training.
Oh boy, did it.
Big time.
Yeah.
Before the terror attacks, there were roughly 2,400 flight schools in America. After about 7 to 9 years of the fallout from all the problems that took place, today, literally now 24 years later, we're down to about 1,600, give or take, flight schools in the United States. The terror attacks shut all the schools down, if you recall, for up to a month or two.
Yeah.
Almost a third of the schools are now gone. If you didn't have the cash in the bank
To weather the storm.
to weather the storm, you were not going to keep your school open. And that's exactly what happened. So, they eventually started to reopen, operate. It was a really tough time for everybody in the United States, not just for flight schools, but flight schools in particular. They operate on tight margins to begin with on the business side. And so unless you had a piggy bank of some cashola,
right,
you had a really strong chance of running into a closure.
A lot of those places live in month to month and cash flow because they don't own all those planes. They're leasing those planes or they have them on a note, right? And I get it, boy. I'm a business guy. I get it.
Okay.
So, in our little cheat sheet here, when we get to learn a little something about you, there was something on here, and you and I talked about it briefly before we went on the air, and that's about career pilot. And I want to make that career pilot pre-screening, because as you were talking about, first of all, not everybody's cut out to be a pilot. Period. Not everybody can do it.
Agree.
I mean, they're not going to get there.
Right.
But you can if you try and you work and you study. But then there's another level. When you go to career pilot, that's not for everybody either.
Right.
You may be a pilot, you may be a good pilot, but that doesn't mean you'd be a good career pilot. And you gave me some really good insight, and I want you to share that with our audience. Why what the difference is.
Okay. So I'm sure in the past, several years, you've introduced people and had people in your program from the airline industry, I would assume. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
And they talk about hiring, and they talk about the different things that they're looking for in an airman, okay? So before a pilot gets to the point of getting that first job, so to speak, at the career airline or corporate side, they have to learn how to fly the airplane. They have to become ab initio students. Ab initio means the precursor. It's the very beginning, ab initio.
I didn't know that. See, I just learned a word today, guys. Ab initio. Define that again. What's that?
It is at the start line of anything. Ab initio.
Ab initio.
The initial. Initio.
My
initial.
vocabulary's going up,
Yep.
man.
I'm not the smartest guy. Okay, I'm not the smartest guy.
Got me on that one.
But that's something that it's interesting. Students start at the ab initio level, and as you know, because you're a pilot, okay, we build. Piloting is a building block. Every day you learn something new, right? There's old pilots and bold pilots.
Absolutely.
There's no old and bold pilots. Okay,
That's
right. And some of my QB buddies, that have 30, 40,000 hours of flight time, still are as humble today as they were, 30 years ago when they first got into the cockpit to be a student pilot. Okay.
And I'm a QB myself, and I get it. As a pilot, if you're not learning every single flight, you are in deep trouble.
Deep trouble. So your question that you've just kind of, you laid the
career pilot,
the pathway here. Okay. One of the things that we introduced through FSANA, through our trade association, was not just the concept, but the concept and deployment of pre-screening through some type of psychometric testing. Now, that's a big fancy word, and again, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but as you mentioned about 4 minutes ago, not everybody is born to fly, okay?
That's true.
There are kids that come out to the airport, they're here right now. Right now it's sun and fun, which the weather is great. It's a beautiful day today.
Sure
oh my
is.
gosh. Clouds are out there, so it's keeping a little bit of that radiation heat down. And these kids are going to fall in love with this industry. They're going to see these airplanes. They're going to see the Blue Angels, or whoever they're going to see. They're going to touch airplanes, etc. Sit in simulators, and as a result, you fall in love. It's kind of falling in love with a human being almost. Aviation is a great place.
You can ask anybody in this room.
True.
We all got that in common.
Right. But we're not all born to fly. We're just not. And so it's okay. There are people that can learn to fly a single engine airplane at 120 knots, or 130 knots. But because they may have a few issues or a neurological issue or something going on, when they get into the cockpit of a high-speed turbine aircraft at 450 knots, at 35,000 feet, they can't keep up with the airplane, for example. And other things happen.
And there's a great old saying, stay ahead of the airplane. Stay ahead of the airplane.
That's it.
That's, as a pilot.
You stay ahead, you don't get dead. Okay?
I've never heard that one. But
There's another one. So as a result, we were looking at statistics, and at the regional airlines, just going back 7 or 8 years ago, at the regionals, not the main lines, when they would take in a new class of cadets, maybe 24 kids at a time, something like that, the wash rate, which means what percentage of these young people, they came through all their pilot training at a flight school. Right. They had their private commercial instrument, their a CFI, so they could fly. Somewhere between 20 to 30% on average. Some were higher, some were lower, but they had to wash them out. Washed them from the regional training class, okay? It costs a regional airline a lot of money. It costs anybody a lot of money to train. And so, as we were watching this and learning this ourselves and listening to the airlines, the regionals especially, we said, there's going to come a time, and it's coming soon, that we're going to have to get into this pre-screening. So we started to learn about pre-screening, okay? We're not saying that a flight school should automatically turn somebody down because they maybe were a little marginal. But at least it gives that new student ab initio applicant the opportunity to know that there may be some questions, and they may be marginal, and maybe they need to go into something else in aviation, because there's tons of careers in aviation.
So they point that out to the student prior to spending all that more money to go to the next level. Say, look, here's what our data shows about you, and we want to just tell you up front.
It's up to you as the student, or your parents, if you're younger and the parents are helping you to pay for this or whatever, whether or not you want to pursue that, okay?
Sure.
But there is a wash rate, and every good quality flight school anywhere in the world, including America, they need to be honest and transparent with their students and say, look, Joel, we love you. You're a great guy, and overall, you're a good person, but we've now had you sit with 3 other instructors. You went through 2 review board panels with the assistant chief instructor, and you still aren't at the point where we feel comfortable for you to solo the airplane, okay? So now you have 60 hours of flight time as a student pilot, Joel. You didn't solo, and by 60 hours, you're getting close to being able to have your private already, give or take. It's about 65 hours in America today to get your private, give or take 65. You can get it in 40, but the average right now is 65 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Of flight.
Is it down to 65? I know it was like 72 there for a while.
Well, it varies depending, 65 to 70%. There's no specific study that I can point to right now or go into a textbook file and say it's now 72.5%. Okay, that I can't do. But it's averaging 65 to 70 hours of flight time. I met somebody in Melbourne, Florida, a student yesterday at FIT. I was doing some lecturing, and I asked the class, how many of you, there were like 30 kids in the class, who soloed with the least number of hours here? And some hands went up, you know. Of course, it's 16 hours, so that was a catch question, because you got to be 16 to solo in a powered single engine airplane. I said, all right, who got their private in the least amount of time here? And of course, you know, one kid went up in 35 hours, 40 hours.
141 minimum is
40.
Is it still 40? I thought 141. I thought part.
Well, no, 35.
35
yeah,
and 141.
But you know, the kid. This was a 141 school. FIT is a
right.
So
141.
So he was 40. But there was another kid that came to the college at a 61 through a 61 school. So he had it at 35 hours. But his parents also were in aviation as well. So again, that helps when dad or mom have an airplane. That's all part of the deal. So the pre-screening, the psychometric testing, just gives that student applicant an opportunity to get a feel for whether or not they have a decent chance to make it.
Right.
So that's a big thing. That's, you know, we're pushing that, encouraging that at all the flight schools. The new International Aerospace Accrediting Commission, which we formed 2 years ago, that's a standard in the IAAC.aero.
Okay.
And that new organization that we formed, as that standard is in place, if you want to become an accredited school through the IAAC.aero, you must deploy some type of psychometric testing in that standard, or you cannot be an accredited school.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And that's to the pre-screening for the benefit of the student.
Totally for the benefit of the student, not the flight school. However, there is a benefit to the flight school, because if there's somebody that is really going to be challenged, you don't get into the butting of heads, because it gets very difficult, very difficult. I know of situations where parents have threatened the flight school owner. What do you mean my son or daughter can't do this? And we put down a big deposit. We also encourage, for anybody out there in your viewing audience, nobody should need to be putting down large deposits for flight training in America.
So we're down to about 3 minutes, believe it or not. And one of the bullets I had on here is the aviation life cycle. What do you mean by that? And you only got about 3 minutes to tell us.
Okay. I've been in aviation since a long, long time, okay? And the aviation industry goes up and down, just like the stock market goes up and down, okay? Mm-hmm. We're gonna have ups and we're gonna have downs. We right now are seeing a slowing of career pilot hiring, and that's probably gonna stay that way for a little bit here, a couple years.
Of course it was, you know.
It was, but there was a main reason why it happened. And the explanation I provide, and I'm not an expert, I'll never call myself an expert, but what happened was, we had this thing called COVID.
We did.
Now, all the international pilots that flew for the airlines, they were all basically furloughed, laid off. They had to or early retirement. So now you have all these airmen that just kind of dispersed and went away.
Yeah.
Okay, now what happens? They have to be backfilled, okay? Unfortunately, I think some of the airlines went a little bit harder than they should have as far as those early retirements. Delta did the best, in my humble opinion. That's just my opinion. They worked out some deals with their contract with their union people, and they kept their people on, but at lower compensation. So they were much more able to keep those pilots and bring them back in again. You're going to be out there, we're opening up the international routes, and we're going to start to fly some more. But that's just, again, my opinion of what happened. Now, we have all of these pilots that are now, you know, gone. You got to backfill them. The regionals, they lost their captains to the mainline carriers, and then that sucked up the flight instructors. 3 years ago, many of our schools could not get flight instructors because they were just immediately being pulled up in the flow to the regionals. Regionals are going up this way, and that's what happened on that side of it.
Okay, well that makes sense. So that's what you mean by the life cycle, and I see where that goes up and down. And what do you think about? And again, we're down to just getting close to a minute here. Your thought on the 65 retirement age for mandatory?
I'm going to be very torpedoed and very direct. I would look and I would love to have age 70. If you are qualified
Pass
and
the
you have
medical.
your medical, some of my best friends fly Boeing 777s and 787s, and they have so much knowledge to pass on
no
and
doubt.
share, but they're being pulled out. One of my best friends is about to leave the cockpit in a 787. He's a check airman, and it's just incredible. All of that knowledge is going to get lost, versus if there was somebody, a young pilot FO, co-pilot, at 53 years of age in the 787, you know a lot more at 60 and 70 than you do at 40 and 50, just like in the business world. There's a reason that Bank of America, Citicorp, and others at Wells Fargo don't hire CEOs at 25 and 30 years of age.
Well, thanks for coming.
It's
been a very interesting conversation. You've really given me a new perspective.
Thank you for having me. We appreciate it, and have a great day at Sun and Fun.
I am Joel Hargis with the Florida Aviation Network at Sun and Fun 2025.